Welcome to the Fit to Talk podcast.
You just found the #1 health and fitness podcast for performers, and you're listening to a special guest episode.
Yes, you are. And if you like what we do, please leave us a review, or on Spotify, click that follow button.
And also, if you like meaningful, helpful, and accurate information, then maybe Fit to Perform is for you.
Yes, indeed it might be. You can find out more information over on our Instagram or on our website.
Moving on, we have a very interesting guest for you today.
Oh, yes, we do. So, our guest today was born in Munich, Germany, and migrated to Australia with his family at the age of 8. Always sensing he was different, he explored a plethora of modalities before discovering the transformational tools of Access Consciousness, which both saved his life and continues to change his life. He continues to facilitate with and personally use these tools every day in his life and desires to be the change he would like to see in the world. He is a certified Access Consciousness facilitator, university-trained naturopath, father of 2 teenage children, and lives in the UK with his wife, Shannon O'Hara.
Please enjoy the marvelously maverick Max Zoulek. It's Fit to Talk. So where does the story of Max begin?
Good question. I mean, where do we start? This lifetime or...
Well, that's an opener.
The finest opener we've had.
How far do you want to go?
Let's go with this lifetime, and then we'll ask you more.
Yeah, cool. Well, I was born in Germany. I'm originally German. My family's full German. We moved to Australia when I was 8 years old. That's why I sound like this. And 6 months ago, my wife and I moved to the UK here, and 5 years before that to Sweden. So she's from California. We're a mixed bunch. My kids grew up in Australia, but now they're going to boarding school in Switzerland. So my son's with us at the moment because they're on holidays.
So really across the globe.
Yes. So that's that part of it.
Yeah.
And then, okay. It was weird going from Germany to Australia when I was 8. Like it was, kids are adaptable, totally fine. But I never felt like I fitted in. And I was always trying to fit in. I tried to make myself very fit in, like everything that I saw around me, all the people and so forth. And eventually, in my 20s, I realized that doesn't really work. And then looking for more, so what's my path? I tried all sorts of different things. I studied a trade after school at fitter and turner, steel work, welding, and metal and lathes and all that sort of stuff.
In demand in Australia at the time, I imagine?
I guess it's always in demand. I was working on semi-trailers and stuff. I mean, I didn't have to do it. It wasn't that in demand. I didn't have to do it. But I'm interested in how things work very much. Right. And I didn't have any really hands-on experience before that. So I did that for 3.5, 4 years. And then I was like, working in a workshop in that sort of environment, that sort of headspace, not my thing. Took me a while to acknowledge that. But I didn't really know what I wanted to do, right? And I had a friend who was a naturopath, so natural medicine. We were training together with martial arts. And I had some sessions with him, and I was like, wow, this is something really different. So I started going that route, and then I studied naturopathy at university in Australia there for 5 years and started working in that. I built a house. I, did some more sort of hands-on stuff. Kids were sort of born while I was at university as well. And then at the end of that, I actually felt the most unwell with my body that I'd ever felt in my life. I was going to see doctors and I had blood tests and all this different sort of stuff and couldn't work out what was going on. And at that point too, I was thinking, I just spent 5 years at university. Shouldn't I know what's going on with my body? And I tried all different stuff, all different diets and all the things that I could, and even traditional Chinese medicine and Ayurvedic medicine. And I got some really good stuff from all of it. There were some great things from all of it, but nothing really touched what was going on for me. 2 years after that, that's when I found Access Consciousness. And I was like, wow, after 10 years of doing all sorts of different things, this was something that I'd never heard of or discovered any time beforehand. They were talking about choice. They were talking about judgment, right and wrong. No one had ever really spoken about judgment. It's a concept. It doesn't really exist. Only people do it. nothing in nature believes in that concept. And then using those tools, like my body just kept getting better and better. I wasn't even really intending to. I was just sort of like, this is cool. But using that changed sort of everything, and then changed things financially for me, changed things with relationships and just how I functioned generally. So 13 years later, I guess I like to invite people to that possibility. It's not for everybody, but if it contributes to them, if the people are like, yes, that helps me with my life and what I'd like to do, perfect. So with the videography, with the Access Consciousness business, all the stuff, it's a possibility. I'd love for people to know that exists.
How did you come across it initially? Like you say, you went through the whole naturopathy kind of side of things, and then how did you get to Access Consciousness? Is that something that's been around for a while, or?
It had already been around for quite some time, but it was still quite fringe. But it was in 170 different countries because it's a global thing.
Is it a franchise? Because you mentioned that there's
not
different
in that
businesses.
sense. There's facilitators of Access Consciousness. So you become certified to become a facilitator, very simply at the beginning to facilitate bars classes, which is a simple body process, 32 points on the head, light touch, and it dissipates and releases, you guys might have heard of it, the electromagnetic charge that builds up, in all these points in our heads. So someone that's done 3 bars classes with different facilitators can facilitate that class then. So it's very simple, but then if you become a certified facilitator, there's more prereqs. You have to actually be more developed in what it is to facilitate the foundation classes and so forth. What was the question?
So is it a franchise? Was my
development. How did you come across it initially?
How did I come across it? I was interested in weird stuff. And like I said, it was quite fringe at the time, and I was like, and they were just talking about stuff that I was like, wow, I did all sorts of men's groups, and which were also fantastic. I got a lot of stuff out of that. But I'd never heard people talk about something so pragmatically. It's like your choice creates your reality. Mm-hmm. And that's what happened with my body. The reality that I was creating beforehand was deteriorating my body, and I was sort of in a dying process. And I was 30 years old. But then as my reality started shifting and I started making different choices, and it's not even I'm going to eat something different or exercise differently or something like that. It's a choice of your willingness to live and enjoy your life and create your life in a way that works for you. Rather than following some idea or what society says, this is the life you should want. It really allowed me to sort of step out of the box and start asking myself some questions about what actually works for me. If I wasn't trying to follow this and that and function from the shoulds and actually recognize that there is a true power in my choice, then what's possible? And like I said, my body naturally started changing then. I wasn't even trying, but it just started, everything got better. So that's at the beginning how it really touched me, and that change really occurred. Whereas beforehand, for 10 years beforehand, I couldn't find that.
I'm fascinated by
really
that.
Different.
Because I think both of us can probably attest to a similar sort of process. I think of having to deal with something, either traumatic or stressful physically or health wise, and making a choice about how to handle that and changing the perception, and that actually being, to reframe what we've previously said before, that being the thing that allows us to do exactly what you're saying by realizing that you have a choice as to how you deal with that thing. So I hope you don't mind me asking this. What were the sort of physical things that you were trying to deal with that you couldn't solve that this then managed to unlock for you?
Super low energy and a lot of digestive stuff. And the way the doctors would diagnose that was irritable bowel syndrome and chronic fatigue syndrome, which are exclusionary diagnoses, where it's we don't really know what's going on, so we're going to call it this. We're going to give it these labels, but you're on your own.
Yeah.
There's nothing we can do for you. Exactly. And that's where it was. And that was after a whole bunch of different tests and so forth and seeing different people. And I was like, okay, cool.
What do I do now? Yeah,
exactly. I'll just keep suffering for a while.
This is my life now. Okay, fine.
Well, that's it, isn't it? Quite a lot of people who have both. I know people who suffer from both of those conditions in that way, and actually, that's the feeling, isn't it? You go, well, what do I do now? This is my life now. So, what actually happened for you then when you found anxious consciousness that was the thing that changed that? You mentioned the choice, but what was the actual moment where this started to shift?
Well, that's the interesting thing. There was no real moment and there wasn't like a choice. It was just shifting my reality. And through the tools and processes and the questions, which is one of the primary tools, is being in question and asking questions so you energetically get a sense of what creates. Like if you ask a question like, what's wrong with me? It's not really a question. And you notice the energy is sort of like, because you're coming to the conclusion first and foremost that there's something wrong with you and then trying to go in that direction, but it's incorrect. But if you're like, what else is possible? It has a different energetic result in that it like starts opening and creating sort of like more possibilities show up. What else is possible? You're looking for something like what else is possible? And so being more in the question was really one of the things that for me shifted this. Like rather than I was always looking for an answer is one of the things that I was doing that was not working. It was like, where is the answer to get something right or to get away from something that I've decided is wrong? Rather than what if everything's a contribution? Once again, a question. Because literally, have you guys ever noticed or found in your lives that there was something in your life that didn't actually contribute to creating greater in the future?
Creating greater what?
Like when you look, you know how something can really suck at a certain point in time, but then 6 months, 12 months, 5 years later, you look back and go, oh, I see the gift in that.
Yeah, I can absolutely get on board with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I often talk about like when I broke my leg, and at the time it was one of the worst things. But then looking back on that moment, I go, actually, it was probably one of the best things that happened to me.
Yeah, because you can learn from it and grow and
a bunch of things happen because of that, and you go, So I can totally kind of see that viewpoint.
It's not. I'm not trying to say is like we should look at everything in a positive light or put some positive thing on top of it. But when we ask a question like, okay, what's right about this that I'm not getting in a situation, for example, that really sucks at the time, like breaking a leg. What's right about this that I'm not getting allows us to sort of relax into the possibilities that might be available that we wouldn't otherwise perceive.
Yeah.
And that's this different possibility that we can have with being in question, that no matter what's up in our lives, even if something amazing happens, like you win the lottery and you can still ask, wow, what else is possible?
Yeah.
Because then you're still opening up to possibilities rather than, okay, this now means this, and we're going into this very, like more limitation essentially rather than the possibilities that actually exist in the world.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I think you used the term being in question. Is that what you would frame it as? Is that what that is?
Because me as a head tripper, right? Like I can think and think and think and think. And some people might be able to relate to that. You can ask a question from your head, like, oh, what else is possible? But you're not really being the question. Like when you're being the question of what else is possible, and there is a true curiosity of possibility. It's different than just in your mind, what else is possible?
Sure.
Right. So this is, for me, the difference between being the question and stating a question.
And this may sound like a stupid question, but how do you get from that point of, rather than just thinking about the question, of being the question? How do you make that transition into that?
Yeah. It's a choice, essentially. And it's like something that I can't really tell you or someone couldn't really tell me. It's something you have to choose yourself. It's like, actually, okay, if I was truly being this question of what else is possible, what would that be? Like it's another question to sort of discover, what is this for me? Because we can't copy someone, imitate someone, or take a point of view and make that right for us. It's a discovery process of what's true for you, essentially. Like what is truly possible in this moment, for you?
Yeah.
And all three of us will have a different perspective at this given moment. And neither is right, neither is wrong. It's just like different possibilities. We're all aware of different realities, different possibilities, and capable of different things. And then even if we come together, the three of us like this, like what's possible then? With everything we're aware of and capable of.
I love that. I wanted to touch back on that before, because we've got loads of questions that we want to ask you about all these amazing things, but to touch back on the naturopath stuff. So you went to university to study that, is that right?
Yeah.
Tell us a little more about that chunk of your life first.
For me, that was the avenue that I could see at that point for something different in my life. And it was great. I learned a lot of stuff. Like I mentioned earlier, I like to find out how things work. And so on a very science basis, because it was a university course, so they did a lot of science-based stuff, biochemistry, organic chemistry, all that, pathophysiology. So I learned a lot of really cool stuff. But it was never there was never a thing of your point of view creates your reality. Like that sort of, our choices create, like you create your body with the choices you make. And what I'm saying specifically is beyond food and exercise and that sort of stuff. Like I mentioned earlier too, about the choice to live. Like if someone doesn't have, if someone doesn't want to live, like they'll create a situation where their body deteriorates a lot quicker than someone who is stoked with living just because they fucking love it. Can I swear on this podcast?
Yeah. Go for gold.
Cool. And you guys, I imagine, would very much perceive that energy of someone that's like stoked on life and someone who's just sort of like trying to make do and sort of get away with stuff and just do the bare minimum to like not get in trouble too much in the, you know, having a body and so forth. So there's even the application of questions in something like that. Like, what would you like to create? What would you like your life to be like? Not just look like, because it's easy to sort of come to conclusion and, well, it, you know, all the things that it should look like, the white picket fence and the kids and all the stuff. Like, what is it for you? Everyone's different. And at different points of our lives, like, we'll take a different turn. Like what we've been working towards at a particular point, and will change, and it sort of doesn't have the same enthusiasm or joy that it did beforehand. So being in question once again then allows us to really discover, okay, what is this now? What is possible for me now that I'd like to choose and create? I think I got away from the question again there.
That's, our podcast is
naturopathy.
I guess, is there anything from naturopathy that you think is super valuable that people could take away?
Oh, absolutely. And that's the thing. Like for me, that was one stepping stone in my path. And I don't actively use a naturopathy, but it's totally part of how I think about things and one of the ways that I look at things. I'm really into food and nutrition and so forth, and not nutrition from a like, well, this is how much vitamin C and vitamin D and magnesium is in this food. It's more so like actually the joy of food, and food from a very much more natural perspective than, I guess, what is available mostly today. And using food to create the joy of the body rather than the rightness.
Okay, so how does one go about doing that?
That is a big question. Yeah. Yeah, I guess this podcast is mostly going to be about the question. Because we have to be, our bodies are so different too. Just as we are all different, like our bodies require different things. Like what you, Bobby, your body is like really thrives on might be really different to my body or somebody else.
Yeah.
So being in question once again with our body and recognizing that you have a body, because a lot of people just sort of drag their bodies around and make them do stuff rather than being in the question of like, hey, what does my body actually require and desire? And finding out how your body works and having more the subtle feedback rather than the sledgehammer of awareness, right? Mm-hmm. Which can happen, like in my case, for example, when something gets pretty chronic, like I wasn't listening for a long, long time. And then I had to listen. Yeah, really being more in the question with the body as well. And
so I guess for us, we would call that mindful eating, right? Which would be a mindful eating practice or intuitive eating, I suppose.
Yeah, I suppose so. And then
you're listening to the feedback that your body gets from the food and the things that you take in, and making decisions based on how your body feels, but on a genuine, subtle level, not like cravings or responses to things that spike your insulin or anything else, like removing those and then being able to come at it from an actual healthy perspective. So that kind of sounds similar?
Yeah, I'd say that's an element of it, yeah.
Yeah.
Which is really just like that information gathering and so forth.
And then you get to live in that world where once you've learned to listen to your body, then you can enjoy what your body needs at that time.
Yeah. And then our bodies continue to change too, right? Like we all notice that as we get older and our circumstances change or whatever. And like being in the question then allows us then to continuously be aware of what the body might be asking for. Because what I found too is our bodies are super dynamic in how they change and respond and what they're asking for. Well, at least mine is. And I've seen it with some other people too. And then other people their bodies might be really different. So it's like, yeah, it's being in the question for ourselves.
Amazing. What do you mean when you say that your body's really dynamic in the way that it changes what it's asking for?
Like what it's asking for? Yeah, it's like sometimes I might be eating a lot of meat for 5 days or something, and then after that, not very interested at all. But it's like this, not so much of a craving like you mentioned beforehand, but it's definitely like it's this desire that's there. And I know these days when my body is pretty specific about yes on something rather than just like it's a point of view.
Yeah.
Because the other thing is like we're super aware of what other people, like what their points of views are and what they're like. If you're sitting in a restaurant, for example, being aware of what other people are ordering and desiring and wanting. Have you guys ever noticed like in a burger joint or something like that, it's like you feel way more like a burger than if you're at somewhere else where there's not burgers. It's a rough example.
I was like, I think a burger's a bad call for me, but yes,
right.
Potentially yes.
Right. Or a food for me, an example is like I used to smoke for a couple of years when I was younger. And when I smell secondhand smoke, it's still very enticing.
Yeah.
Coffee, I don't really drink. My body's not really into coffee, but my wife drinks coffee. And when I smell it, I'm like, that smells amazing. But then if I'm at a coffee shop with a bunch of other people, then I'd be like, I really should have a coffee. Or I like really, there's this desire to have a coffee, but it's much more of an external thing, like being aware of what other people's points of views are about the coffee, for example. But if I'm not in that environment, it's super different. So it's this awareness too of recognizing how aware we are of people that are around us and their desires and their body's desires, and recognizing then also what is actually true for your body is this other element that I just introduced with that.
Fascinating.
So do you think like, say for example, like you live with your wife, like do you feel like your wife's kind of not viewpoints, but like the questions that she asks in her relationship and her dynamic with food, does that impact your kind of thought process a lot with food, or would it potentially be different if you were apart? Like when you're apart on certain days, does it then become a different thing to when you're then together?
I'd say with my wife and I, it's more of a logistical thing because, you know, when you're with another person and eating, it's a bit of a logistical thing. And we're actually quite similar in how we function with food and so forth. Our bodies are very different, but how we function with food is very similar. But when I'm with other people, for example, staying for a couple of days or whatever, then I really notice the difference. But we've become very compatible. Being in a relationship for a long time.
So do you think that has happened because you've been in a relationship for such a long time that you've become compatible in the way that your bodies work together in terms of food?
I'd say so, yeah. Yeah. Plus we have a similar preference as well. We like to call our mainstay of food hippie delight.
Hippie delight? What's hippie delight?
I guess... definitely like foods that are cooked at home that include like a lot of legumes and vegetables and meats and like raw based foods.
Yeah. Whole
foods. Whole foods.
Yeah. Whole foods.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I feel like,
where the teenagers are sort of like, yeah, but they'll still eat it, but they're sort of like, okay.
So to sort of put it through my processing, you'd say that when we're in those settings, in like the coffee shop that you mentioned, you'd be going, you have your own sort of trained response to that food, right? When you smell it, let's say that you like, we talked about walk to walk the other day.
Oh, we did.
Let's use walk to walk, that you have previously liked and enjoyed walk to walk. When you smell it, you're going to have that desire for it again, but which is an internal drive, something that you've programmed in. But you're also saying that the external factor is the fact that almost you could phrase it like societal pressure that we're aware of, which is a different way of phrasing it, of the desires of those people, and being aware of it would make you want it even more. That's a paraphrased version of what you said. But is that So the outcome is that both the internal programming, as I would call it, and the, I think you'd frame it like energy from those people, it is what increases the desire for that food.
Yeah. I would call it awareness. It can be a kind of pressure. It's such a mixed dynamic, right? Because if there's something where there's a pressure that you don't really have a preference for, or then it's not as much of a pressure on you as it is like if it's something, for example, an ex-alcoholic, when they're in a bar, that is an extreme amount of pressure, I would imagine. Mm-hmm. I can't say I've been in those shoes, but from what I've seen, that's a whole lot more pressure. So it's sort of like your preferences and how your body works, and then also the environment. Like burgers aren't a big thing for me either. But with the coffee shop thing is where I notice it like the most.
Yeah. So would you have the same thing in a coffee shop that was empty?
Ooh.
Good question. We should try it.
Because I'm like,
that is very interesting.
Is it the location, the setting, and the things that have previously happened in there, and they exist in your mind, or is it the actual perception of the people and their opinion, and the fact that they're consuming it and want to consume it?
The more intense somebody's point of view about something is, the more I notice it. I've noticed. Like, so if
they're not speaking to you, even if they're strangers.
Exactly.
So how would you know how intense their point of view is if you don't talk to them?
Have you ever gone to I hope I don't offend anybody with this, but sometimes there's a vegan restaurants. Some people can be very militant about their vegan point of view. And I remember my wife and I walked into a vegan restaurant. This was years ago. And we walked in and we were repelled by it because there was so much rightness about that type of food. Like we eat vegan stuff. Like we're not vegans, but we eat vegan meals and really enjoy them. And like we don't have a point of view either way. We tend to follow more like what works for us. But we were so repelled from the point of view that was coming from that. So it doesn't have to be spoken. It is like we are so aware, all of us, I would say, of people's points of views, but it's not something that's generally acknowledged.
I wonder if it's that thing of like, when Steffan, you and I go into a coffee shop, immediately how excited I am about the coffee. I wonder if my unspoken excitement is the kind of thing that then influences you. I wonder if that's kind of a vague example.
Yeah, so I would frame that like the perception of people, right? In that sense that we're reading not only their expressions, but their micro expressions, their body language, everything that they're exuding in that sense.
Yeah.
That and as you said, we're incredibly perceptive about those things, right? We don't need to look at somebody to be able to take in millions of points of information about them and to perceive an opinion. And the issue is that sometimes we get that wrong, but that's a whole other. It
goes through our filters as well. So the more of a strong filter we have, the more it can get like kinked into something that's like relevant in our sense in how we kind of perceive it through the filter, but it's completely different for the person. But the energy that's coming through is we're still perceiving it.
Yeah, because it's real for you in that moment. So I'm fascinated by that as an idea. Sorry.
Well, I love your example actually, Bobby, about the enthusiasm and the joy about something, like a coffee shop or whatever it is. And then
you do love a coffee shop.
A good one. I'm currently excited about the thought of a coffee.
And then some people have rightness or like a judgment, because that's not judgment. That's like the joy of what you enjoy. And then some people are like, no, this is the right thing or this is the wrong thing. That's like then this other energy that you might perceive sometimes as well, which probably would not be as nice as sensing somebody's enthusiasm, for example, but you're sort of like, it tends to be, for me, more repelling because it's like, it's a real strong projection of this is right.
That's fascinating because I think the vegan restaurant is a great example of that because, there is sometimes a sort of militant righteousness that comes with that because of moral reasons and things. But I think it's interesting that we mentioned coffee shops because I'll walk into the odd coffee shop and I think maybe it's like a really hipster coffee shop quite often. And it's almost like I'm not welcome there.
Yeah.
And it's that same thing, I think, as to what you're describing. And I wonder if part of that is my own insecurity of being like, I'm not as cool as these people. But also they're perceiving me and how I look and behave and move in the same way and then having their opinion about it. So perhaps when you walk into a vegan restaurant, they go, they're not vegan and they don't like you because of it. Do you know what I mean?
I would even suggest that it has nothing to do with you. Like they probably not even sensing you as you walk in as such. They're just so much in their point of view of like, this is the right thing and this is the cool thing and this is who I am and this is the, all of these different points of views. It would be an interesting question next time you go there to be like, what if none of this actually belonged to me?
But just to touch on that, because I think that's, I think I would trip up a little on this, because if they're affecting you, then you must be affecting them, or you're seeing yourself as being different to them in some way in the way that you perceive the world.
Well, what if who you be, like, if you didn't have a point of view about that thing, which creates more space, what if that was impacting?
I agree, but it is still, that is in itself impacting in either positive.
I would say in a different way. Like it's less in this electromagnetic way of like the rightness and the wrongness. Like it's polarity. Judgment is polarity, and we have scales. Sometimes it might be quite mild. Sometimes it might be really polarized. Like some of the examples that we talked about. Some people might not want to move out of that polarized spectrum very much. Like that's really their thing. For me, it's less also about like, it's not so much about changing other people. Like everybody's entitled to have and be, where they're at. But what makes it easier on you? Like the more, the less of a fixed point of view I'm willing to have, the easier it is for me. Wow. In any case, whether it's in regards to my teenage kids or my wife or my, people that I care about a lot, or someone that's in a cafe that I don't have a connection with whatsoever and may possibly never see again. But it makes everything so much easier to like not have to be in reaction to something that they're in, and then possibly even impact something for the greater.
Yeah. Well, they say, don't they, that most of life's pain comes from you trying to control things you can't control.
Right.
And if you get rid of that and simply focus on the things that you can, which I think is not dissimilar to what you're saying, then you go, okay, I'm going to let go of my concern about what my teenager might do or not do or wear or whatever it might be. And you go, that's not for me in this moment. Sorry, don't want to put that on you and your family. But as an idea, then actually it's a lot, your life is spared quite a lot of pain. Does that line up a little?
And we can actually have a huge impact too, I believe, when we're willing to be the bigger person. Like we don't have to react or respond to somebody else's fixed point of view or whatever that is. And we're willing to be the bigger person, be like, cool, interesting point of view.
Yeah. And the world's big enough, right? For all of them. That's what's lovely and joyous about it. That like you said, let everyone be who they want to be. I loved what you said at the start about access consciousness, say it's not for everyone, but it does help like people. And actually, I wanted to jump back to that and go, you've been a facilitator now for 12, 13 years, did you say?
Facilitator for about 10.
Facilitator for about 10. So like, can you tell us some of the ways that you managed to, is help people the right term, or what you've managed to achieve during that time?
Great question. Because oftentimes it's hard to tell the impact that you are having. Like people might tell you 6 months or a year or two or never about the change that actually occurred, like when you spoke to them or had this thing. Wow, interesting question.
Perhaps it might be an easier question to answer. Like, what is it that you aim to do when people come to you? Obviously, it's very case dependent on each person, but what are the types of people that you help, if that makes sense? Who can you help?
Types of people, it is so across the board. Like there is, like the people that come to Access Consciousness and my Access Consciousness classes all feels like they can be doctors, lawyers, that sort of stuff, or people that are severely struggling with like things. They might have a mental illness or they might have whatever it is. So it's a really far-ranging thing. Wow. I'm having an interesting time at grasping this. Like, is it?
I guess it's that thing, isn't it? Like, so it can help everybody, but how? Like, what is it that?
I guess why I'm having the difficulty with the question is because it's so different for everybody. Like what somebody receives and chooses from the tools that are available. Because that's the beauty about the tools. It's not about you should follow this path. It's not like another set of judgments that you should apply to your life that are more right than
previous.
otherwise.
So I guess what are the tools is the question. If you go, okay, you're going to come to this class, we're going to give you these tools, then can you give us an idea of what they might be, or like some of the processes?
We've been talking about them. So the questions, like, and that's the thing about the choice. Choice is, you could call it a tool, I guess, but I guess it's more of a fact of physics, like choice creates.
Yeah. It's a skill you can practice too, right?
But exactly, it's a practice thing. It's not, there is no right choice or wrong choice. And that's the cool thing that I've discovered with Access. There is no, because how much have we tried to like try and make the right choice and not make the wrong choice? And that, how much that stagnates making a choice, period, for us.
Yeah.
Especially it's around more of a tricky field in its own topic in our lives. So being in the question allows us to step out of like looking for an answer and trying to narrow down this path and a decision and opening to possibilities, because the universe is contributing to us all the time. We're not particularly that willing to receive it a lot of the time. And so it's a practice, like you said, when the more you be the question is, the more you allow different things to come in. You might overhear something at a coffee shop. That something that you've been looking for or asking for quite some time. But if you were really set on, no, this is the way it's going to come, that information and that awareness, then you would miss that entirely. Mm-hmm. So there's always these whispers of awareness and information that are here to contribute to us if we're willing to receive it. So being in the question really allows us to be more connected in the world to everything that's possible, whether it comes from people or from nature or anything. And it allows us to get a better sense of what's actually true for us.
Yeah. So if I were to come to a class, we would work on, how would we go about working on that together?
Depends which class, I suspect.
I see.
The bars class, which is the first one-day class, is you just learn how to run the bars and you do it. You gift it twice, you receive it twice. You get a manual and such, and then you can run that process with anybody that's done the class. After that, foundation class is then a 3.5-day class, which has a bigger manual and is more about like the verbal processes and other things. And it touches on topics of money, relationship, entities, even a bunch of different things. There's a lot of specialty classes in Access too, actually. There's, like I said, about entities, and then there is about business. There's money classes, right? Riches for You, pragmatic psychology, which is, applying it to psychology. And I think that's why I'm really struggling with the question, is because people have, like, everybody's so different in what they're looking for. Some people might come for a period of time and then they're like, yes, I found what I'm looking for. And then they might not do any more Access classes. Some people like myself will be like, oh, this is fucking awesome, and just keep going, because it continues to contribute constantly. Like you said, the practice. It's a practice. Like there is no end goal for me. I was always looking for some sort of answer or goal beforehand. And then with Access, I realized, no, it's actually about the question. Mm. Like fundamentally, if you live from question, and I think that's what so many old traditional modalities like the Buddhists and so forth, it's really about living from the question, not trying to come to conclusion on a bunch of stuff, because we don't know. The universe is so much bigger than what we experience on a sort of daily level. So what if we were willing to have more of that? So the question allows us to open to that.
Cool. You mentioned entities, and I'm so excited to talk to you about this, because we saw this on your Instagram. And tell us a little bit about entities, because we're now into the sort of element of it that, as you said, some of this won't be for everybody, and people will have some opinions about this bit. I imagine.
No doubt.
So tell us a little bit about that. And I want to know your experience with that, because it sounds like you've definitely had some opposing views at some point. Is that true? Actually, start off with what
me personally had some opposing views.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, my wife actually, she's the founder of that particular specialty topic.
Okay.
Talk to the Entities, it's called. If she didn't have and she's also the stepdaughter of the founder of Access Consciousness. So she grew up with him from the age of 4. And if she didn't have him in his life, like really asking her the questions of, what are you aware of here? And is this an entity that you're aware of when she was freaking out about something? Or he was an antiques dealer, so he'll bring like old stuff home, and then she'd be like freaking out about this particular trunk that he brought home, and then he'd ask her some questions, and they'd get to an awareness of like she'd mention a name, and then he'd call the person that he bought the thing off, and it has like something to do with the wedding dress of the lady, and that was her name that was like in the trunk or something in the past. She's got a book called Talk to the Entities, and she has a bunch of stories in there. That's one of them. But essentially, if she didn't have that upbringing, she would have quite possibly died at a very early age, just from being like insane.
Wow.
But where she is now is like this extremely functional and a very intelligent, multi-million-dollar businesswoman and force in this world of inviting people to recognize of what they're aware of, particularly in the world of entities, but also in other areas. And there's actually a lot of what do we have? We have about 200 facilitators that facilitate that topic around the world as well, Talk to the Entities. And I interviewed about 25 of them at one point. That's on the YouTube channel as well, Talk to the Entities, about their stories. And I didn't know a lot of these stories as well. And where some of these people came from, where one of them, for example, she was getting so allergic to food, she couldn't eat anything. She would be like reacting constantly, and she was like extremely underweight. And when she started to talk to the entities, that's when it started changing. And now she's a Talk to the Entities facilitator. She doesn't have any issues or allergies with food and so forth. And I can't tell you how this works or necessarily that it makes sense, but just talking to people like that, like literally from that point onwards, when they started using those tools, they were able to deal with something in their life and with their awareness and their capacities that nothing else could touch beforehand. So I didn't have this extreme sensitivity to entities, right? I met her, I was interested in her. We kind of got together. I did some of her classes and stuff. And then about the third class in, I was like riding my bike home, and I was totally happy, but suddenly like this gloom came onto like, I just started feeling like paranoid, and there was something wrong with me, and like which was actually very familiar to me, like throughout my life. And then I remembered, she mentioned this during class, like this psychological sign of entity awareness. So I used some of the tools, which was basically just clearing entities, and it completely lifted and shifted. And that's the first time in my life that it ever, to that degree, like I could actually do something and it would shift the energy. Rather, I'd just wallow in it. And it's sort of this cycle of sometimes it'd be worse, sometimes it'd be better. And then that's the first time I was like, wow, okay, I perceived entities, but it was nothing like I thought. Like I didn't see a ghost, I didn't hear a ghost, but I used the tool, and then energetically and psychologically, it was a completely different world. And I was like happy again. And then this happened repeatedly, and then using different tools and so forth, becoming more aware, recognizing how actually hugely aware like we are of the entity world. And if you want to look at it from a science perspective, I guess, when you look at sound frequencies and the frequencies of light, how narrow those spectrums are that we actually perceive with our senses, right? Like what happens with the rest of those frequencies? We're just like, no, I can't feel it, I can't sense it, therefore it doesn't exist, right?
Yeah.
But there is, like even when we look at it from that science perspective, there is so much more that our quote unquote sixth sense, if you want to call it that even, but it's our awareness is what we know and what we're aware of, but it's not particularly socially acceptable.
Yeah, I think I think there's two sides of that coin, right? That it's big business in one sense, like it's an incredibly popular topic, and I think like something we mentioned earlier on, it's sort of split down the middle. Like I think half of the population are probably very very adamant that that exists and is real, and the other half diametrically opposed, to that view. So I'm not sure that most people would disagree. But so you mentioned ghosts. Then is that when you say entities, like what does that mean?
It's a big umbrella term. An entity essentially is an energy that's defined, right? So you can have a business that's an entity, like Coca-Cola, for example.
We are entities, right? So we are all entities in our own.
And then there's, exactly. So it's businesses, artworks, that sort of stuff. And then there's beings. Like, for example, we all, our identifications of ourselves are, what creates the entity. We define this form of energy, that being that you be. So even if, like we say, like, I'm a 42-year-old white male, I live here, this is my preference, and this isn't this, and I'm married, and this, and blah, blah, blah. All that sort of stuff is like a form of identity. It can be a form of awareness too, but the more you believe in it, the more it's an identity, right? And then you'll see a lot of people that if you challenge their identity, they get very defensive. Mm-hmm. That's when it's like more of a identity rather than just an awareness and a choice that we can make. So big umbrella of entities, but what we're talking about specifically is the beings, like you guys, like me, and the ones without bodies. Like they had bodies beforehand, but now they don't anymore. And there's plenty of those, more than people with bodies. But we're aware of them too. But the more they retain their identity, the more they might be stuck in a particular identity. Like, for example, there's a lot of talk about haunted houses. Someone might perceive like an old grandma in the kitchen still cooking and cooking and cooking. She might have died and not cognitively really, or not really passed over, and she just stayed in that job that she had for, let's say she did for 20, 30 years, cooking for the family, taking care of the family. That was her thing. That was her real identity. And then she maintains that after she passes over, but then she's kind of like stuck in this time-space reality, because entities have a different time-space reality than we do when we have bodies, right? So with the clearing, for example, which is, who are you? So you're identifying the entity. Who are you? And they're like, oh, they know you're communicating with them. You can do it with groups as well. And then you say, who were you before that? So you're getting them to recognize that they had a lifetime before that, an identification before that, a lifetime before that. So who are you before that, before that, before that? Getting them to go through that until the energy kind of shifts. They recognize, oh, I've had all these lifetimes. This is not my only identity. And who will you be in the future? Oh, I have choice. Like, what are you going to choose now? This is not your only identity. You had all these other ones too. What would you actually like to choose? Like, being stuck in this particular identity is not your only choice. So what now? That's a way of facilitating choice for entities. And then also, what's your job, or what are you? They identify with these different qualities. And then what usually occurs then, if an entity is ready to go, because you can't make entities do anything, it's just you're facilitating choice. It just might, in that haunted house scenario, for example, they might just be more space because they've disappeared. They've like made a different choice. So that's one of the tools of talk to the entities is like clearing. And sometimes you might have to have a little bit more of a energetic conversation with them of like, okay, what's so valuable to you about this identity that you've chosen that you like maintain? Would you like something different? Or some entities will be here to take care of somebody because that's what they've committed to. That's their choice. So there's a lot of different ways, like the more we become energetically connected and aware with that universe, that's available and possible there. And there's a lot of people that have those capacities in an extreme form might also be subject to a mental illness because they've never been able to really deal with that awareness and that what they're aware of.
When you're having these conversations, though, how does that actually play out? Because obviously the way you might perceive them, some people won't be able to see them, some people will. Like, is that not you're putting the question out there and you don't know the outcome, or how will you know the outcome? Because it's essentially one-sided from your perception. Is that right?
No. There's usually quite some feedback to it, and it really depends on the situation. And God, I'm just okay. How far do we go? On the podcast. So, yeah, how far do we go on this? Because it's also, this is not something that you can really agree on with somebody. It's something that you need to like start knowing for yourself. Like no one can validate your entity awareness is another thing. Like you have to be willing to start gauging it yourself and not doubt yourself and just start recognizing what is true for you. And you might feel fucking crazy because like no one else can align and agree with it or validate that awareness. But following the energy, and like I said, when I was riding my bike and I did the entity clearing, and the first time in my life where it was like a complete shift in my psychological well-being, for me that was undeniable. And then when that happened repeatedly, and that's how I started knowing for myself, oh, this is actually true, right? It's because I couldn't validate with my 5 senses or somebody else's point of view. And then there was like more and more different scenarios where I started gauging how I was aware of entities, because we have different entity awareness signs as well. Like for me, it tends to be more psychological. For someone else, it might be more physical. So it's really like once people start taking these classes, they have to apply the tools and then start gauging for themselves. So it's hard to have this conversation in one sense because people have to sort of go down that road and find out for themselves. Mm-hmm. And that's why we do it a lot from question, because people have to find out for themselves. It's not like this is how you do it and this is how you should feel it and so forth. Like, no, that doesn't work because you're not really empowering people then to know what they know.
Well, I'm fascinated. I have 2 sort of main questions with this. And the first, I think, is that is there a difference then? Because if you can't come to an objective truth between a collective group of people, if it can't be agreed upon by those people, then how do you know that it is objectively true versus true for you? Mm-hmm. So which are 2 different things, right? It doesn't mean that one is better than the other in any way, shape or form, because the outcome is the same. You still need to go through that process that you're describing. But it being true for you in your mind and perception of the world, it doesn't necessarily mean that it is objectively true, like that thing actually exists or is there. So how do you reconcile those 2, or what's your opinion about that?
Well, firstly, I would question objective. I know that's a very common, like we can say, okay, objectively this table exists and it's this color and so forth. Like that's easy because we can sense it with our 5 senses. But with how the universe functions and what is ultimately true, it's a little bit more tricky. First of all, science is sort of behind the 8 ball to a large degree. Like we don't have a lot of the technology or ways to quantify, verify certain things. So the objective thing is a little bit tricky because we can perceive a similar energy amongst a group of people and be like, oh, did we sense that? Yes. But when you start getting too into objective and that thing of like, is it the same and like quantifying stuff, it makes it a little bit more tricky. So I often say too, consciousness is not really a group sport. Unconsciousness oftentimes is. You can usually see that in a pub or football stadiums and I'm not saying that's lesser or anything like that. It's just like people do tend to go into this herd mentality. And a lot of people respond to, like we mentioned earlier,
the coffee shop, right?
There's a bunch of people doing the same thing and then it's easier for someone to join in.
Yeah, and it builds.
And it builds and this momentum and it's weird. But with consciousness, it's not really the same thing. Like people have to know what they know. They might sense and perceive similar things, but it's not about aligning and agreeing. Because that's once again one of these things on this polar scale where alignment, agreement, resistance, and reaction. Like what if we didn't have to even be on that spectrum? Just like we don't have to be on the spectrum of right and wrong. Like what if it's a spherical universe of possibilities where one person can totally perceive something that's different to what somebody else is perceiving?
I absolutely agree. I'm actually not in.
I love your question because it is like what a lot of people would be asking. And it's a tricky one. Like people have to be willing to go there, like beyond the sort of objective and the alignment agreement where like everyone can agree on this solid reality, because there is no solid reality. Like, yes, a lot of people agree on certain things, but then there's so much more. There's like an infinite amount of realities that are possible.
Also, I don't think the aim of the question is to see if people can agree on it in finding an objective thing. I think the question I was aiming for is more, it actually doesn't matter if it's objectively true or not, if it exists solely in that person's mind. And then when you get a group, perhaps they're affecting each other exactly like you're saying, even if that exists and that perception just exists in their mind rather than there being an objective truth that overrides that, the outcome is still the same, isn't it? Like in a positive way, that you go, even it's sort of the same as religion in that sense, like, which was the other thing I wanted to touch on with you. You know, religion says a lot of similar things, which is you can't know, you have to roll with it to a certain extent, right? There is no proof of this. There is simply how you feel, and these lessons that we've learned. And it doesn't really matter whether it's objectively true or we can prove it or not. It's possible because the outcome for people is clear and measurable. Do you know what I mean? Like there are positive elements, that all the positive things and the outcomes that you're describing are positive because of that process, in the same way of all the positive outcomes, and we won't mention the negative outcomes of religion, but all the positive outcomes of religion too, that you can have, you know, so many benefits of that. But you mentioned passed on with one of the entities earlier on that you were chatting about. Is this sort of laced in with a specific religion? Does it have the idea of an afterlife? And how do those two things marry up for you?
Religion's a tricky one because I think that's such a broad statement in terms of like there's so many different religions and then different ways that people approach religion. Like some religions are very much about controlling the masses, and some religions are about empowering people, or the way people approach religions, empowering people to know what they know and be themselves. So I'm sorry, can you repeat that last question again?
Absolutely, yeah. So is the concept of entities tied to a specific religion, I suppose is question one. Like, is there, you say if an entity passes on, do they pass on to a heaven or a hell type situation, or is it, what happens there?
Infinite choice.
Okay. What does that mean?
What if that being could choose whatever it would like to choose at that point?
Mm-hmm.
And that's essentially what it is. It's like some might be stuck, and then some might go to the light and become part of oneness again. Others might choose to reincarnate, or like, and that's the thing. What would you like to choose?
But we do have religious concept in there, the idea of a oneness at the center, and also the idea of reincarnation, right? They are sort of borrowed.
It's less
concepts.
Oneness at the center. It's just like, from, I guess, my perspective, consciousness. Like everything is conscious. Everything has consciousness.
No, I love that.
Yeah.
And it actually jumps back to my previous question of then going, is that a collective consciousness, or is that
it's just consciousness?
yours?
Consciousness exists. Like we are these fragments of consciousness, and we have like choice available, but consciousness is like
I love this
like
topic.
the fabric. And that's where the concepts don't come in, like right and wrong, and like a lot of these human concepts that we apply on top of stuff to make society be what it is.
So I guess if you killed all living beings, would consciousness still exist?
Yeah. Consciousness exists regardless of what anything looks like.
That's
from
an intriguing
my
concept.
perspective.
Yeah, I think that's
like, because consciousness literally exists. It's like the physics of the universe and like physics beyond this world, I would say. And choice is part of consciousness. And that's the beauty. They're like, there is no right and wrong choice. There's just choice.
That helps me understand the version that you're talking about, I think, because that's where I was like, is it one person's consciousness? Is it a collection being created, or is it a separate thing?
Infinite consciousness. Consciousness is infinite.
So consciousness is not tied to any entity. So consciousness is its own concept that exists.
Not from my perspective. Or from Max's consciousness perspective. Like there is no one. There is no one.
Okay, so consciousness is its own thing in that sense.
Consciousness is, I guess.
So in that sense then, is it not quite similar to how a religion might perceive a deity?
I would say that comes down to a person's perspective once again, like in how they relate to that. Some person would project it out as a deity and a thing outside of themselves and not recognize that they're part of that. Or consciousness. Okay, so the definition from Access from Gary Douglas, who's the founder, consciousness includes everything and judges nothing. And I think that's like one of the most brilliant definitions, or actually, it's actually the only definition I've heard of consciousness, because it is all inclusive. Like it literally includes everything and judges nothing. Like there is no judgment it doesn't exist. It's a human concept, like we've said, but it includes everything. Yeah. And it's infinite.
And I want to skip to something a little more fun now. Or perhaps for me now, because you on your Instagram you were saying about myth busting some things about entities. Could you bust some myths that people have?
Okay, so a lot of the stuff that we've seen in movies, and they make it very dramatic, very significant, very like, you mean like something that you can.
You mean I can't trap them in a backpack? There's a new Ghostbusters coming out. That's why it's online. That's why. But
exactly.
What was
so very
myths?
significant. But the thing is about when you're aware of and dealing with spirits or any beings, it's like significance is always something people apply to it to make it more meaningful. And that's where they do with religion, with movies, with all sorts of things, or even relationships, especially relationships.
We've all been there. Yeah,
exactly. But if you took the significance out, then what would you be aware of and what choice would be available, essentially? Yeah. And that's where, when you function from no significance with entities, so much more is possible, because you get to actually interact and be and facilitate in that way more than anything else. Cool. So, that's myth number one. So we've seen a lot of stuff. And then religion also uses entities in particular ways, like they're more powerful, either this and that. It's like to control people once again to a large factor, or to make it bigger than you. But entities, only because they don't have bodies, doesn't mean they're more conscious or smart or anything than someone with a body, right? And when you start becoming aware of entities more so and sort of like perceiving them more so, you recognize that just like people with bodies, most of them are lost and confused and don't really have any sense of direction, or they have a very strong identification that they think is their direction, but they're just like fixed on something. And then there's some people that are actually like being themselves and are more like being.
Yeah.
Right? There is some entities that are incredibly like spacious and beautiful and amazing and like willing to contribute to something greater. And then there's a lot that are just dazed and confused and respond well to clearing, like to actually facilitate them to choice so they recognize, and then they move on and choose whatever.
Yeah. I love that idea of myth busting some of that stuff. I'm so glad we got to.
Thank you for the question, actually, because there is so much of that out there. So many myths.
And an entire genre of movies based on
absolutely.
That. So, in which you also said, I wanted to ask you if you had sort of, and I wonder, this might be a tricky question, if you had some like a top 3 sort of takeaways or bits of advice that you might be able to give for people listening, especially around the idea of maybe how do you identify signs that you might be able to have that awareness of these entities? Like how and why should people come and find you? What's the advice, I guess?
Right. So like I said, entity signs and symptoms can show up in a lot of different ways. Some might be psychological. So if there's something that's like really repeating constantly in your life that you're noticing, maybe that is an entity awareness rather than a problem that you have, right? Because it's easy to come to the conclusion about, this is a problem that I have. And what if you're more aware than you think you are? Maybe not just of entities, but of everything. Just as posing that as a question. Like rather, what if there's actually not something wrong with you? What if there's something strong about you? What if every wrongness is actually a strongness?
I like that phrase.
Yeah, I really like that.
Yeah. And this is something that I've found to be true for me so many times, because I heard this from Access from the very beginning. And with so much stuff in Access at the beginning, I'd be like, I'd hear it and then I'd be like, that's interesting, but I wouldn't like believe it. And then certain things like your wrongness, what if every wrongness that you think you have is actually a strongness? When I would like through the years look at it, and for example, I thought I was horrible at relationships, horrible with money, horrible in these certain ways, like really bad, like where when I get to it, I just be like, no, I suck at that, like completely. And here's all the evidence why I do from the past. And then recognizing that when I stopped buying that as a wrongness and a problem, I could actually see the strength and where I was actually like really capable in those areas, right?
Yeah.
So just this question for people out there, what if like all the things you think are wrong about you, what if that's actually a strongness? Just you don't have to believe it or anything like that. Just be in that question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. Awesome. Thank you so much for coming to join us, Max, and thank you for all my probing questions, trying to find out more about this, because I'm genuinely fascinated, and it really has been a pleasure. How can people find you?
So I've got a profile on accessconsciousness.com. If you just type in Max Zoulek there, or maxzoulek.com, and pretty much everything that I'm involved in and so forth is on those websites.
We've been at them both. And
we have.
And thank you at home or wherever you might be for listening.
Yeah, and if you've enjoyed this episode, click those like and subscribe buttons and find us on Instagram at Fit2Perform West End. As always, if you've got any questions unanswered, you know what to do. Slide into those DMs. I'll be in there opening myself up to some entities.
Yay! It sounds very sexual.
That sounded way more sexual than I was intending.
Thanks again.
Nothing wrong with that.
There we go.
What are you doing in your own time, Bobby? Thanks again for listening. If you like what you've heard, we have been Fit to Talk with our wonderful guest, I can't speak. Our wonderful guest. It's an entity right now. It's continuing with a wonderful guest, Max Zoulek, and me, Steffan.
And me, Bobby. And if you didn't like it, we've been Joe Wicks. Peace out.